Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer, and welcome to Gospel Minded. We'll spend the next few minutes talking about themes related to psychology, our behaviors, our emotional health, as they relate to the gospel reading for today. Because as we know, so often our psychology overlaps with our spirituality. So, like always, this isn't intended to be a substitute for any kind of counseling or spiritual direction that you may be involved in, but it is really neat to point out some of these parallels between what goes on in our mind, our psychology, and then what happens in our spiritual life. And we try to nourish that spiritual life every time we go to Mass. And so today's gospel is from St. Mark, and it has some very interesting themes which are very relevant to our psychology and behavioral health. I just want to read a few of these lines from the scripture for today because a couple things come up that really stand out to me. It's from Mark chapter 1, verse 21. It says, "And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. And immediately there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, 'What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God.' But Jesus rebuked him, saying, 'Be silent, and come out of him.' And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, 'What is this? A new teaching? With authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him.' And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee." Really a fascinating set of lines from the gospel today. And there's a lot of different interpretation with this. A number of commentaries have been written on it. But the thing that stood out to me today was two times in this short verse, the word authority pops up. Authority. And understandably, the idea of authority has a lot of relevance to our psychology, our behaviors, because who are those who are subject to authority? All of us. Who are those who exercise authority? Many of us, in some way, shape, or form, exercise a type of authority. And so this is a very relevant and important subject, and one that continues to fascinate and has for centuries. I mean, the idea of authority and what that looks like and how that should work. The ancient Greek philosophers were commenting on it. And then subsequently, throughout generations, political philosophers have commented extensively on it. These days, you can't go to a leadership course without hearing something about authority and right exercising of authority. In industrial organizational psychology, authority is a huge topic. And in our spiritual life as well, authority is a big deal. As Catholics, we're supposed to be conscientious and obedient to the magisterium, the instructions of the Holy Father. The bishops in communion with him are priests. And so living in this country, the United States, we are subject to the authority of the government. And so authority can look so many ways. At a big sort of organizational level, government, the church, then a more intermediate level with our work, with the organizations that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. There are authority figures there. And then at the lowest level, within our own homes, there is the idea of authority. Husbands and wives, parents, extended family. Really a lot that can be said, and we can talk a lot about authority, but for the purposes of time, I'm just going to highlight a few things as I think it's relevant to our psychology, our behavioral health, our emotional well-being. First of all, the origin of the word authority, it's pretty interesting. It means the originator, and even the word authority has the word author right in it, as though the one who has authority writes the rules, makes the rules up, can be the originator of some directive. And so the word authority in and of itself carries a lot of weight. And over the years, there have been a lot of experiments in psychology kind of highlighting or studying, examining what kind of impacts authority has. So Stanley Milgram did a very famous experiment which demonstrated in a lot of ways people who are subject to authority tend to go along with what the authority figure says or promulgates or recommends. There's another famous study by Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford Prison experiments, which for all of its controversy did kind of give the idea that if you're in authority, it's easy for it to go to your head. And so let's talk about these two aspects of authority. First of all, being one who is subject to authority. That is all of us, you and me both. So when we are under the authority of someone else, something else, an organization, an entity, how should we react to that? Because I think a lot of times the idea is that we're free. I'm free. Anybody who has authority is trying to suppress my freedom, trying to restrict me. And that's not always the case. So often, as a subject, as one who is under the authority of somebody else, it can be the case that the person in authority over me is trying to get me to a better place. And so what we know from behavioral health is that we who are subject to the authority of someone else tend to go along with it. We tend to follow with whatever that authority says. My recommendation is that we follow conscientiously. What do I mean by that? We don't want to just blindly follow a leader wherever they go. We want to be able to question, we want to be able to discern, and we want to make sure that where our leaders are leading us is the best place. So I say conscientious because we do want to be obedient, we do want to be loyal, we do want to follow our leaders, especially if we believe that they're good leaders. We want to take that step with them and go that good direction with them. But be conscientious and think through what the leader is offering to you so that we can make the best decisions for everybody involved, ourselves, our leaders. Sometimes our leaders are working with the same kind of blind spots that anybody would be. And if we're asking questions, if we are trying to give different perspectives, it might be a way of really helping our leader become an even better leader, as it were. The second thing is following with a joyful heart and a good attitude. You know, in religious communities, a lot of times they take vows of obedience, obedience to the authority figure, the superior, and they do that very solemnly as a way of recognizing that in following this superior, I'm really following the voice of God. And while that may not always feel that way, especially if we work secular jobs or have some really complicated relationships with our bosses at work, there is this sense that perhaps in obedience, it's a way for us to grow and advance in our holiness and our spirituality. So I would just say, when we are in a position where we need to follow the instructions of a leader, try and do it with as good an attitude as you can have. It's going to make it better for you. It's going to make it better for everybody involved. And then what happens when there's a disagreement or problems with a leader? I would say that we should focus on the person, not their power. I have a boss, and my boss is a person, a human being, just like you, just like me, and they have the same kinds of struggles, the same kinds of brokenness, the same kinds of inclinations. What you are going through, they likely are going through as well. Because remember, everybody is subject to somebody. So even my boss is subject to somebody else who's a bigger boss than they are, and they too are accountable to somebody different. And you can keep going up that ladder. And so I would focus on the person and not the power, and just give them a break and recognize that very likely they're going through the same kind of thing in their life that you might be in your life. Now, let's go on the other side. What about you? If you are a person in a position of authority, if you have power, if you're the one that exercises some kind of authority over others, we have to use that responsibility very prudently, very justly. And this is where political philosophy is very useful. So many authors who comment on this subject use this idea of ordering authority towards the good. So if you're a person in a position of power, we need to convert that power to authority, because a lot of people can be powerful. The mob is powerful, but they don't have legitimate authority the way that, say, a commanding officer would in the military or our elected officials do in the government. We have to use that authority not to build up our own stature, but to help those that are subject to us, who are under our authority, to help them become better, to become the best versions of themselves. So, as a parent, my kids, I have authority over them, but I want to direct my authority for them to become better so that they can strive to be good. And sometimes that means some tough love. They want candy, they want cookies, they want TV, they want this and that. Sometimes that's okay, but sometimes as an authority, as dad, I have to say no, and they may not like that. But the idea is that that response is trying to get them towards what is good, help them to get to a place that is really going to help them be their very best. And so if you are a boss, if you are a person who has some authority, be thinking about that consistently. How am I exercising my authority for the good of others? How am I exercising this responsibility I have to help those who are working with me, to help them grow, to help them be better in their job, to help them be better as people? And then finally, the last point is that we're all subject to the authority of the Almighty. And the gospel reading for today makes it very clear that He who is the supreme ruler of all of us has authority over us, over unclean spirits, and we can always turn to Him, our great ruler, our great King, to help us and aid us in all the ways that we need. So I hope this is helpful to think about, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen today. Again, Dr. Garrett Boyer for Gospel Minded. Take care.